Welcome to the Insidious Deep Dive. This might get in the way. Welcome, my little children of the darkness, or my little maggots, whatever you devoted cult members prefer. Today I have decided to make this deep dive a little bit sexier and dress up as one of my favorite spirits from the Insidious franchise, the Bride in Black. Though it pretty much just turned into me putting on drag, and I feel fucking fabulous, I have to say. Obviously, we're talking all things Insidious today because a brand new Insidious movie just came out. And because of the new movie, maybe there are some newbies to the franchise, or some newbies to the genre of horror in general. Okay, yeah, see, it wants to go right in front of my face. I'm not having it. My job here is then to welcome you into our world. On this channel, we do the opposite of gatekeeping. I am not a gatekeeper, I am a gate welcomer. And if you're somehow not a member yet and you'd like to join our cult, then all you have to do is click subscribe. Easy as that. And if you never want to miss our next meeting, then click the notification bell too. Maybe if I move this further back on my head or something. Ow. Okay, babes, now what will this video entail? In my franchise deep dives, I do like to go in the order of events. So of course this means I will start out with the inception of the first movie and go along the timeline of the franchise and share all the best behind the scenes stuff. I put in a ton of interview clips so we get all the insights that we possibly can, and then I also go over all of the monetary and critical reception. Today I'm only covering the first 4 movies of the franchise because in another few days I'll release my review of Insidious The Red Door. This video is just to catch up anyone with a franchise who wants all of the fan insights without having to do the hours of research yourself. So if that all sounds good to you, then grab a drink, grab a snack, let's dive right into it. The first Insidious film follows the Lamberts as they move into a new house. After their son suffers an accident, he slips into what they believe to be a coma. When several ghostly experiences plague the family, they resort to calling in paranormal expert Elise. She determines
it's not the house that's haunted. It's your son.
His father, Josh, then heads into the further to find his son and rescue him from the lipstick-faced demon, but something else returns in his body and kills Elise. The heads of the team that brought us this movie are James Wan, director, and Lee Wanell, writer. You might recognize them as the same team that brought us the Saw franchise, which is what brought them into the mainstream. However, that franchise gave them the reputation in the early thousands that they were gorehounds, so they wanted to shake things up. Insidious became the answer to that. Basically, the entire goal or the challenge of this movie was to make it the antithesis of Saw. Being huge horror fans themselves, they took some inspiration from Spielberg and made this sort of a spiritual remake to Poltergeist.
I really wanted to prove that I can make another scary movie that does not have an ounce of blood or guts or gore in it, and that's why I equate it to Poltergeist, because Poltergeist wasn't like that. Actually, Poltergeist even has a great scary moment where the guy looks in the mirror and rips his face off.
In terms of writing the movie and coming up with the concepts, James and Lee both took real-life inspiration. Both members of this Insidious duo do believe in ghosts, one of them actually having a ghostly experience himself. James tells the story of being in a hotel room one night when the apparition of a Victorian child appeared to him. And apparently oftentimes people think that he and Lee are not afraid of anything, but if you ask them that, they will tell you the opposite.
There's this strange perception that because we make scary movies, we're not scared of anything. If anything, I said it's the opposite. We're terrified of everything, which is why we're capable of making scary movies, I think, because we know what is scary and we like to take that and put it up on screen because we find it extremely therapeutic.
Yet again, these filmmakers don't fit the criteria that many people often try to saddle horror directors with. The same is true of John Carpenter and Wes Craven and Tim Burton. People think that they're these weird little guys that live in these big creaky houses. In reality, it's generally the opposite, as you saw. James Wan probably lives in a studio apartment with no corners and no hallways in it. No, I'm just kidding. He lives in a $20 million home in Bel Air. But anyways, as far as Lee's real-life inspiration, he ended up talking to a paranormal psychic investigator. And it was the opposite of what he was expecting. He was expecting some sensationalism. He wanted to know the scariest things that he'd ever been through. But the investigator really just wanted to stick to the scientific elements of his career.
Yeah, I chatted to a guy who was a psychic and sort of a paranormal investigator, and sat down with him and went through, and I wanted to sort of approach it from a scientific point of view, at least in some of it, because I felt that if you meet with the people in that business, they're desperate to not seem like kooks. He didn't want to have the neon palm in the window. Every time I would be like, huh, that's great, try field meters, what's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? He would be like, not really really much scary happens. We want to talk more about the science of it. So he was desperate to move it into that area, so yeah, but he takes it very seriously.
In that same TIFF interview, they let it be known that Elise was partially inspired by the real-life Lorraine Warren. Little did they know that just 2 years later, James Wan would be making a movie about the real Lorraine Warren and that it would make $300 million. But on the topic of Elise, let's talk about how they cast Lynn Shay. James had seen her in a movie called Dead End, which I have actually done a breakdown of on my channel. If you enjoy this cosplay, then maybe you would also enjoy a video where I drew on a fake beard to drunkenly talk about some really bad Christmas horror movies. I smell subterfuge. Oh. Blows my mind that James Wan was a fan of Dead End, but it kind of is so bad that it's good. And then in this interview, Lynn Shay was like, yeah, he was a fan of me, and so he came with a friend to my house to meet me. And I'm like, okay, something got lost here. I want to meet you. Can I just show up at your house? Anyway, then in her words, she says that James Wan was shooting a prequel release for Xbox. I don't know what that means. Those were her words, not mine, but to my understanding, they were shooting basically a trailer for Xbox. She ended up taking that gig sight unseen because she really likes James. She was like, yeah, whatever, I'll do it. And I don't really want to get into it because the content of that short is highly disturbing, but it's all played up for laughs. Maybe look up some trigger warnings first before you go into it because this short does a lot of the bad things, but you might find it worth it to watch this short because, for instance, some funny moments, Lee ends up graphically running over Lynn Shay's character's dog, and then she does this.
You big pile of doo-doo. No, wait! Ugh.
I was just kidding. That is definitely the best part of it, all the parts with Lynn Shay, so I really don't recommend watching the entire thing. The whole thing kind of banks on the fact that you'll find really disgusting stuff funny. Anyway, after that, they had an established relationship, and so it was just a few months later that he called her up and was like, I have a role for you in Insidious if you want it. She took it right away because, again, in her words, she thinks that James Wan and Lee Whannell are both film geniuses. But also in this interview, she withholds information about what apparently informed her character.
And I also have sort of an actress's secret about the character that I will never tell. But it gives, I think, a richness to the role because I have a lot at stake too in telling them what's happening. It's not just me being a seer and I can tell you what's going on in your life because there's something about how it resonates into my life as well.
I don't think we'll ever know what that secret was because in interviews for later installments of the franchise, she does say that they came up with something much better than the backstory she made for herself. But on the topic of casting, one of the hardest choices they made was for the house itself. The first house was intentionally one of the scariest, creakiest looking houses they could find. I mean, endless amounts of corners for spirits to creep around, right? The second house was intentionally the least scary house they could find, just like a typical bright suburban house.
I think it's very important that when you're making a haunted house movie that you pay a lot of attention to the actual house itself because the house is a character on its own right, and I think one should take as much time casting the house as you would cast the actors in the film.
I honestly think that the locations are one of the main reasons why Insidious became as iconic as it did, because like that first house, are you serious? Another very important casting choice, of course, was our lovely lipstick-faced demon. Very fun fact, the composer of this movie played that demon. It's like if John Williams had played the shark in Jaws. But sometimes a horror movie is only as good as its villain, and people were quite taken with this demon. And do you want to know how he ended up with the terrifying title of the lipstick-faced demon?
The reason why he's called the lipstick-faced demon is because he literally paints his face with a red lipstick.
No, that's not the only reason. James also goes on to say that it's kind of his twisted way of trying to look like a clown so he can kind of lure children in. But this look was so effective that it scared poor Ty Simpkins on set. They had a lot of tactics to try to make him feel more comfortable, especially including James Wan and Patrick Wilson. Patrick Wilson had actually played Ty Simpkins' father in a movie previously, so they already had a relationship developed. So that would help Ty feel more comfortable, and then James would also always try to kind of crouch down to Ty's level to talk to him. He was trying to emulate the fact that they were on the same level, that he was Ty's friend. He also took great care to show Ty all the various aspects of the demon's makeup so that he would know that it was pretend.
Nice.
When you go like that and you kind of look in your mouth, you can kind of see your other teeth.
Really?
Yeah.
Let me see.
Yeah, see?
Yeah, you see his teeth. And you see how the inside of his mouth is not painted? You see that? It's not painted at all. That's the real Joe.
Stuff like that.
I remember my mom doing the exact same thing for me at a Halloween party once. We had these close family friends that were super into Halloween, and so they always dressed up with crazy prosthetics every year. And one year when I was like 4 years old, the wife had dressed up with, I think, like an arrow through her neck. Scared the shit out of tiny me. And she'd be like, no, it's fine. It's just me, Mrs. Pettibone. Hi, Kylie. With like the blood dripping down her neck. Suffice to say, I was like, Mom, let's go get some fucking candy because this is too much right now. Anyway, it seems like the onset vibes were incredible. Everyone commended James for keeping a really fun and light atmosphere. It was also super collaborative between James and Lee and even Patrick as well. Patrick was already a married dad at the time, which are two descriptors you could not give James one at the time. So he relied on Patrick quite a bit to help establish that family dynamic. That was super important to them because one of the pillars, like one of the foundations of making this movie, was trying to make characters that felt relatable. They wanted us to fall in love with these people before all the craziness happened because then that way we could better put ourselves in their shoes. Another rule they set for themselves was no false scares. James and Lee both hate it when there's a scare like a cat jumping out of a closet or there's someone harmless behind the fridge. So every time they crafted a scare, it had to be real.
If I had a philosophy for Insidious, it was all about making a movie that has a creepy, chilling undertone throughout the entire film that just permeates throughout the entire movie so that when those scare moments come in, those like big scare, big sting scare, you're already on the edge of your seat.
In my opinion, this movie achieves that effect. I think that is largely due to the house, I think the music, the score, oh my god. Because even in the first act, when everything is relatively fine, I'm like, why do I feel so weird? I know I've said this before, but even the main titles, they're so gorgeous and creepy. I think one of the main things that's such an effective tool is that it's the middle of the day, but the house still feels so dark. I wonder how drastically the mood would have changed if they just opened all their curtains and let all the natural light come in. Now, despite only having 22 days to shoot this iconic film, like I said, everyone seemed to have a blast. But that's not surprising to me because horror movie sets are the best sets that I've ever worked on. What was extraordinarily surprising to me, though, was the fact that the sequel was never originally planned. You know how I mentioned that Josh's possessed body kills Elise and then it's left very open-ended? That's how they thought they should leave it.
With Insidious, you've left it very open at the end. Have you got a second script?
Well, we could say we haven't actually thought about a sequel for this film yet. We don't have any script for one.
Because the ending doesn't necessarily warrant a sequel, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of people said to us with Saw, oh wow, you left the ending fairly open, and we thought that we had literally and figuratively shut the door on it. Then, of course, the producer said, turns out you hadn't. That door
can still be open, we can still open
and we were
it
like,
back up.
no, it's shut. And they're like, no, we found a way, it's ajar. We don't really go into things thinking about sequels just because we still feel so new to the business and we're kind of nervous and superstitious about a film we make. So I think it would take a lot of gravitas to be like, right, that one's in the can, let's think about the sequel.
That just absolutely blows my mind because the sequel works as such an excellent companion piece to the first. It's like a perfect double feature. I'm like, someone's lying because even Patrick Wilson was on the same wavelength as me.
I remember when we were shooting the ending of the first one, I thought the way that we had explored this world of the further and, you know, the astral projecting and the sort of the non-linear time travel that you can do in this other world, it felt like, to me, it was teed up for a second one.
Maybe Lee and James were just trying to mess with us, and the sequel was their grand plan all along. But if you think about it, leaving things open-ended used to be the norm for horror. It's only modern horror that wraps everything up all pretty at the ending. Texas Chainsaw, Halloween, Carrie, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, the list goes on. They're all open-ended, and we've sort of lost that, because I think that when a movie leaves open-ended, it's more likely to plant that seed in your head and leave you thinking about it.
You know the film is effective if you go home at night and you cannot sleep, or you start to think about the film that you've just seen, and it's slowly creep into the back of your mind and has planted an insidious seed in your head. That is when you know you've successfully created a effective, scary film.
And this movie kept people up by the millions. I mean, when I tell you that this was a hit, this movie was made for about $1.5 million, much to my shock and horror. And then it went on to make $100 million, which is about 100 times its budget. Somehow, despite never having a crazy, glowing critical response, it became one of the most popular haunted house movies ever. Or should I say paranormal, because as we know, it's not the house that's haunted. It has a 66 86% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is surprisingly higher than the audience score of 62%. I have a theory that because these are PG-13 films, teenagers kind of make up the bulk of the popularity of it and kind of kept it pushing. I know I went with about 30 classmates for like a birthday party to go watch the first sequel in theaters when I was in high school, but the high schoolers are not writing the criticisms. They're just there to have fun and be a nuisance to all the other members of the audience. So let's look at the critical response at the time, and Roger Ebert was actually alive still at this time, and this was the first and only Insidious review he would write. Despite the positive title, he only gave it 2.5 stars, I believe, out of 5. Insidious is an affectionate visit to the haunted house movie, a genre that seems classic in contrast to queasy cam gore fests. It depends on characters, atmosphere, sneaky happenings, and mounting dread. This one is not terrifically good, but moviegoers will get what they're expecting. I feel that is in contrast to the 2.5 stars he gave the movie, because that seems kind of harsh. I also think it's a weird read of the movie to say that people will get exactly what they're expecting out of it, because it does something that completely subverts the haunted house subgenre. That's why that line became so iconic. It's not the house that's haunted, it's your son. Even Poltergeist didn't have astral projection. And he leaves the article off by saying the main purpose of the movie is to go boo. Yeah, there are loud jump scares, but I kind of think that's a simplification. The Guardian also gave it a bad review, even lower at 2 stars. A rather hokey horror from the creators of mega hits Saw and Paranormal Activity. They just ripped the movie apart in a very succinct 2-paragraph article, saying things like they pity Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne for having to play this hokey movie straight, that the lipstick-faced demon looks like a juggler on ketamine at a rave. And hey, I have seen jugglers on ketamine at raves, and they are honest, hardworking people just like you and me. So a lot of the critical journalistic responses to this movie were kind of annoying, and if I may say sassy, so I say that we go back to the ancient days of this platform. So once again, we're gonna look at the most popular movie reviews of the time. What did Chris Stuckman and Jeremy Johns think? Jeremy Johns praised the movie for having very subtle scares throughout the first act and then leaving like he felt the movie really got under his skin. But he also compares it a lot, like several times, to Paranormal Activity, and I'm like, those movies are not the same. He says, and I quote, the main difference between Insidious and Paranormal Activity is that in Insidious you see the demon. What about, like, astral projection, the creation of an entire alternate dimension? I guess you could argue that Katie went into the further when she got possessed, but I don't know. Overall, he said it's a lot of fun, no alcohol required, which I guess was a metric that he used on his channel for a long time. Now, Chris Stuckman opens his video with one of the goofiest montages I've ever seen, and I'm obsessed with it. He put in the extra effort in this under 5-minute video to give us a giggle. You can also tell it's 2010 because look at that bowl cut. In the early 2010s, all the boys wanted to be Justin Bieber so bad, but he had very high praise for Insidious.
Insidious is one of the scariest movies I have ever seen. This movie scared the crap out of me.
He also argues that the main reason why the movie works so well is because of the realism brought to it by Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne. Like the asshole from The Guardian said, they were playing it very straight. But then Chris's rating system at this time is a little bit beyond me.
I'm gonna give Insidious 4 out of 4 stars, my highest rating.
4 out of 4. This is messing me up a little bit. I am inclined to believe that he just misspoke, because when has a rating system ever been out of 4? Anyways, in conclusion, the average person seems to love Insidious, but the critics were maybe a little bit too far up their own asses to enjoy it. Critics don't matter though, the box office talks, and that meant only one thing. Insidious Chapter 2 follows the Lamberts as they stay with Josh's mom while they regroup as a family, but something is wrong. Renee is still experiencing terrifying visits from specters until they realize something else came back in Josh's body. The spirit of Parker Crane inhabits him. Once a young boy who was abused and forced to kill others for his mother, now just wants a second chance at life. Enlisting the help of the paranormal team once again, the Lambert family fights tooth and nail to eventually get Josh back. So remember, as I said, this was not a planned sequel all the way up until 2012. They still had no plans to make a second movie. Insidious Chapter 2 was not announced until November 19th of 2012.
Well, when we wrote the first film, we weren't thinking sequel at all. James and I wrote Insidious just to get our mojo back. We felt we were really stuck in a rut at the time. We'd had a bunch of films in development that weren't getting off the ground, and suddenly you wake up one day and it's been 3 years and you haven't made a film. And we just sort of panicked a little bit and said, listen, let's just go back and do Saw all over again. And so we weren't thinking sequel, we were just thinking right now.
It just continues to baffle me that this sequel was not born out of a pre-planned double feature or even out of like an extreme desire to make it. It was more a case of like, okay, let's dip back into the well. But because now they had a bunch of characters that already knew what was going on, this presented a new challenge. What would the mystery and story be this time? The first movie was sort of a haunted house turned possession story. So the sequel was to be more of a domestic abuse drama and then a murder mystery. However, because this doesn't typically happen in real life, you know, it's difficult to conjure up the emotions one might have if their significant other was possessed by a demon, they chose a more grounded influence to help Rose Byrne with her performance.
Well, James was cool because he used to say, to give us this metaphor of it's like he's cheating on you. It's like he's having an affair. He'd like try and ground it in something authentic so that would create this weird, you know, clearly they're off kilter and it's like, right. So that was really good.
Obviously a lot of the same cast is in this one, but there are a couple new faces as well. The man who plays the bride in black is Tom Friedkin in Insidious 1. They cast him because they wanted a man to play her so that it would feel slightly off kilter.
The old woman in the film is actually played by a man, which is something that James just thought would be a macabre touch, you know, to have a man in drag.
When people asked him why, he said it's just creepy. You don't know if this is a man, you don't know if this is a woman, you don't know. It's just disturbing.
I don't know if that's a choice they could still get away with these days because that has been a staple of the genre. I think about Norman in Psycho or Zelda in Pet Sematary. Zelda is played by a man in the original. But even 10 years ago, we did not all have the social collective consciousness that we do now. In fact, on Bloody Disgusting, there are a few writers that I guess have this series where they unpack various queer elements in horror. And I would definitely recommend giving the full article a read. I always do with any article that I quote, but I'll just read this excerpt here. Screenwriters need to be a bit more careful when writing villains, especially if they are queer. I can just imagine what a transgender person must have felt when watching this film, thinking it's about an evil ghost, only to realize that it's actually an evil transgender ghost. That in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but it can be read that Parker Crane is evil because of his trans status, in addition to the abuse he suffered at the hands of his mother, and that is a problem. That is an important distinction to make. Each contributor to this article had increasingly harsh criticisms of this casting choice and of this story choice. One of them went so far as to cite another article written by a trans person about this topic. Written by someone named May, who's afraid of the big bad trans woman on horror and trans femininity. She explains her theater-going experience and relates it specifically to the moment where it's revealed that Parker has been hospitalized because he tried to castrate himself. As the movie was ending, I sank down into my seat, hoping that no one would notice that I was trans. I was afraid that if someone realized I was trans, they might make the connection between me and the serial killer turned ghost in the movie. After all, if you don't know me, you might see me and incorrectly think that I'm just some man who is dressed up like a woman. According to the filmmakers behind Insidious Chapter 2, that makes me creepy, insane, and dangerous. This is especially sad considering that this is, I don't know, like 8 or 9 years before the trans panic that has now swept our lovely country. And representation like this can be harmful because it kind of sends a generalized message that trans people are mentally ill or dangerous. But almost everyone's opinion also seems to be that they believe that Leigh Whannell had good intentions. This was just a choice maybe made out of ignorance. I'm inclined to believe that as well, but you know, intention doesn't always matter. But I have some friends across the pond who love Insidious, and one of them also happens to be trans, and so I asked his opinion on it. I sent him an excerpt of the article written by the trans woman, and I was like, what did you think of this? Have you ever had similar feelings while watching Insidious 2? Let me know. So this is what Sebastian said. Hey Kylie, honestly it's not something that stood out to me whilst watching. I was under the impression that Parker isn't trans, but rather forced to be raised as a girl by his mother. My take is similar to how I feel about Sleepaway Camp, at least the first movie. I don't think the movie was intentionally demonizing trans people. Like, it didn't give the impression that the reason Parker was evil was because they were trans. I think people need to take cinema with a pinch of salt. The story would have been similar if the character were cis. I think it's only really problematic when a movie gives the impression that the reason someone commits evil acts is because they are trans. Maybe I just see it as trans people can be evil too, too. Like, humanity as a whole has the ability to be fucked up. So long as cinema isn't implying that trans people are evil because they're not cis, I don't see the issue with having a trans presenting antagonist. You may have seen Seb on TikTok, by the way. He's currently posting content related to his top surgery fundraiser. So that being said, his GoFundMe will be linked down below, so consider supporting. I think that I'm really inclined to agree with Seb here because I've always read the movie and the villain as someone being born out of abuse. That Michelle Crane was the real villain, always influencing Parker even after her death, and that deep inside, Parker was the real victim. I really do see Seb's point because along with Sleepaway Camp, as he mentioned, some people have actually reclaimed Angela as a trans icon. They identify with her growing up being forced to present as a gender that she didn't align with, and they obviously empathize completely with that. I do understand either reaction though, and either reaction that you have is completely valid. And I will have some more evidence later on to support the fact that I don't believe this choice was made with malintent. But anyway, so they made the same casting choice for Insidious Chapter 2, obviously doubling down on it with the whole backstory of the bride in black. And I just have to say that Tom Fitzpatrick, the man they cast for the second movie, did a wonderful job. He is such a funny little man. He even dressed up as the bride in black for Insidious Chapter 3 and was just saying the funniest shit.
Talk to the nice camera. Hello there. What's up? What's you doing? What's going on? This is a great outfit.
And the makeup.
Check this makeup out. This makeup is like...
That's not makeup.
It's a 2-hour makeup job. It's like my face is like the Sistine Chapel. I am beautiful, it's true. I come on to Lynn Shay, and I've leapt at her out of the dark. I come out of the dark and I grab her neck and I say, "This is how you die."
Dun dun dun.
Dun, dun. And she says, "Not today, bitch." And she goes, "Boof," like that, and throws me across the room. You know, I'm supposed to go do the after party afterwards. I'm going to hit the boulevard and make $20 a pop from charging people to take my picture.
Maybe that can help demystify him a little bit, and we can just go ahead and stand the actor rather than the character. And same with Michelle Crane. I think she gave an incredible performance, but Danielle Bisutti is the opposite of her character. Like, the polar opposite. Like, I cannot stress to you enough how opposite she is.
It was, how am I, this little fraidy cat white girl, Christian girl, gonna be the scary, like, you know, ghost, the specter of this movie and terrify audiences? And it's the big shoes to fill.
Well, she did it, and she did it well. There isn't really too much to share behind the scenes wise of this movie because it is essentially just like a fourth act of the first movie. So I'm just gonna go over the most interesting parts of the press junket. In their Fandango interview, James and Lee both shared their favorite types of scares.
One of them that I love the most is building anticipation. There's something very cool about just, you know, the audience is slightly ahead but of our character that's on screen, but then the payoff is something that takes the audience by surprise as well.
See, I would offer a counterpoint to that. My favourite type of scare in our films are the ones that come completely out of nowhere.
Okay.
For instance, somebody is in their kitchen in broad daylight. What you do is establish in the mind of the audience that everything's fine. Subconsciously they go, oh, well, it's daytime and she's doing this, so... And then to have... It's someone in their kitchen in the middle of the day and they turn around and someone's there. I love that.
Yeah, right.
I love that because you take them so off guard.
It is so hard to choose between the two of them. When there's no build-up, the scare usually works a lot better because you have literally no idea that it's coming. For instance, the child ghost that Renee sees in the new house, 1 second she's taken out the trash and then boom, child ghost, which by the way was not played by a child but by the adult Ben Wolf. He is a little person who is probably most famous for all of his roles on American Horror Story. This is sort of where I give our writer and our director the benefit of the doubt, because I feel like they just implied that exact same logic with their casting of the bride in black. They cast Ben because they wanted the look of the child to just be a little bit off, just a little bit off kilter, as they said. So maybe it's the same logic, I guess we'll never know. Anyway, back to Insidious 2, I am so torn between who I ship harder. Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, or Rose Byrne and Patrick Wilson. He and Vera obviously have this kind of old-timey love, really charming chemistry. But check this out, as he and Rose are talking about The Conjuring during the Insidious press junket.
I sort of was scared when I watched it, but then I let it go after when I didn't think of it, and then I had these dreams. Oh my goodness.
You dreamed of me?
Yes. You and your sideburns.
I don't know. You know what they say, if there aren't cheating allegations, then there isn't enough chemistry. I mean, they're no Jessica Chastain and Oscar Isaac, but they have chemistry for days. I'm just kidding, he's been with his wife since 2005, very happy for them. But some of the most interesting press junket moments come from Lee Wanell and his best friend Angus Sampson, longtime friends turned on-screen dynamic duo. They went to Comic-Con and proceeded to talk shit about all the people there and did some really weird photo shoots. For instance, there's this one photo shoot where they're wearing, I guess, space helmets, but they remind me of Sandy Cheeks. There's also this really weird one that they're doing with like this rainbow leg. I don't know what this is supposed to be.
Look, the best thing about Comic-Con is you won't actually have to shower because there's a collective odour down there that you're about 3 miles away from the convention centre and suddenly this sweaty odour hits you of people wearing Jon Snow's fake bear furs on their back.
And then at one point they're sitting with this random woman and there's no context provided. I will leave this unedited. But Lee sneaks a non-consensual kiss on her.
Let me ask you a question then. You sit over here, I'll swap you. Then I get to have my own like Tonight show. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to my show. You've seen Insidious 2. Tell us,
I have.
without giving us any spoilers, are you happy with it?
I am happy with it.
Yeah?
I went home and I tried to sleep and I couldn't for a while because I think that's always a good sign.
Why the fuck did he do that? I'm so lost. Lee, you have people to answer here, okay? We're confused. But also at Comic-Con, they had what looked like a really fun walkthrough experience. They had what looked like Parker Crane's victim room and a lot of haunted house vibes. I wish I could have been there. It seems like all the press they did, the good, the bad, the creepy, really helped to sell those tickets. Insidious Chapter 2 cost only $5 million to make and went on to make $162 million in the box office. But still, the critics have a very hard time removing the sticks that are apparently wedged up their buttholes. I'm kidding, everyone is entitled to their opinions, but I feel like some critics really just want to hate horror movies. Simon Abrams on Roger Ebert's website gave it 2 stars and then had the nerve to say that it was better than its predecessor. Listen to this, I have some words. But watching characters exhaustively explain why they can and cannot do certain things grows tiresome. It's easy to ignore the fact that Josh is inexplicably lost in the further, an astral plane where his soul is struggling to reconnect with his body, but not after he reminds viewers, I am getting weaker the longer I am trapped from my body. At that point, Wanell inadvertently puts a loose plot thread in viewers' hands and hopes we won't pull too hard. Wasn't it established in the first film that Josh is/was a gifted astral plane traveler? Why is he so lost? Why can't he get back to his body? It was also established that he was hypnotized to forget his gift. Where were you, Simon? Is the loose plot thread in the room with us right now? Critics on Rotten Tomatoes roasted it too. It has a 39%, which is almost half of what they gave the original. Jeremy Jahns found this movie to be highly enjoyable, not as scary as the first, but maybe far more interesting. However, he does make a note that some of the humor flops, and this did get a giggle out of me.
It had some awkward humor in it too. I was like, James Wan, you're trying to be funny. Don't go all Michael Bay on us, man.
Taking shots at Michael Bay is always something I enjoy, honestly. I don't know why. And according to him, this was also a good time, no alcohol required, the same shtick he was using 3 years earlier. Now, Chris Stuckman again comes through with a funny little bit in the opening. He's chilling out, he starts hearing Tiny Tim, and there's a cat cameo, such a sucker for that. Then he gets up to inspect the noise, and what? It's the flick pick? I featured one of his super old reviews in my Evil Dead deep dive. But by now, Chris has upped his game. He's got a better background, I'm loving it. He felt that this time around, the story was a little goofy and over the top, but yet again, he felt that it was grounded by the performance of the actors. He also thought that the scares all worked well, and gave the movie an overall score of a B. He also mentioned something that I hadn't even considered up to this point.
Also, let me remind you that as I judge this film, there are certain elements I'm looking at. For one, James Wan directed 2 horror films this year, and I gotta imagine that's pretty difficult to do. The fact that either of them were remotely good is very impressive because that's a lot of people breathing down your neck.
I should have mentioned that already, but not only does Wan deliver a pretty stellar sequel to a hit film, but he also drops The Conjuring in the same year. Big year for Wan, but he has since stepped away from directing either franchise. In the case of Insidious, the reins were then handed to Lee Wanell for the next installment. Teenager Quinn Brenner senses that her mom may be trying to reach her from beyond the grave, so seeks Elise's help in speaking to her. Unfortunately, when you call out to one dead person, all of them can hear you. Thus ensues a battle for Quinn's soul against the man who can't breathe. Ultimately, the grieving family and trio of ghost hunters bring her back. Now, James Wan couldn't come back to direct this one because he was busy directing The Fast and Furious 7. His career was taking off at that point, having delivered 2 extremely iconic and successful horror movies in 2013. As I said, Lee took over for this movie, and this is the first of only 3 films he's directed, so this was his debut. He wrote the script yet again, but in terms of the technical elements of making a movie, he was a little bit far out of his depth. However, when it came to getting people in the mood to shoot the movie, he was kind of a pro. He hosted the cast at his home and screened The Shining for everyone, and then sent the cast out to go see a psychic. This is according to Stephanie Scott, who just had a good time with the entirety of this shoot, seeing the psychic and everything. But she kind of downplays what she went through.
And your character has a very physical part
Yeah.
on the movie. How was the preparation for that?
I mean, there's not much preparation that can really go into it. Kind of just have to like take a deep breath and go for it. There were lots of stunts, but like I was pretty game. It was fun. I liked it.
That's great. Makes it sound wonderful, right? But she doesn't even bring this next part up. Dermot does. She had to have a real cast put on her leg for up to 15 hours a day. Eventually, she learned how to walk in them so she could get herself to the bathroom, and this was for the majority of the shoot. She gets thrown around her room, she gets hit by a car, she gets dragged around, and she pretty much does like almost all her own stunts. I'll admit this looks fun, but definitely not easy. I feel like I would suffer some whiplash or something. And it was a pretty big stunt for Lee's directing debut.
This is a huge stunt. This is gonna be awesome. I get to have blood all over me. One of the top 3 scenes that I've been so excited to shoot.
I'm kind of nervous. Having never directed a film before, I'm always curious what's about to happen. It's not like I have 3 car hits to compare this to on other films.
They totally pulled it off though. I had no idea how much of the stunt was done practically. The last thing about poor Stephanie is that they tried their darndest to get a method performance out of her. For example, during the scare with the bell, Lee Wanell blared a bullhorn to make her jump for real. She also never got to see the man who couldn't breathe until the day that she first shot with him. Speaking of him, Lee didn't really have a clear image of him, but more so just thought of him as a concept.
I wanted to keep him very mysterious. You know, he's this kind of silent creature that really to me is the embodiment of cancer, to be specific, and misery to be more general. You know, all the misfortune that kind of visits us as humans throughout our lives, all the tragedies that kind of touch all of us, like whether it's a relative or a loved one of ours getting cancer or an unfortunate accident, all this stuff, this demon he embodies that.
At the time when this came out in 2015, I found this to be a revelation. Because for whatever reason, despite being 2 years older and wiser and having watched a lot more horror movies, this movie scared me more than just about anything I'd ever seen before in my life, and it was because of that damn cancer man. So great job casting, great job makeup team. Speaking of casting, this is the first horror movie that Dermot Mulroney ever did. In fact, it was the first horror script that ever came across his desk.
From my point of view, this is it's a family story. I mean, that's one of the things that will help this movie be appreciated for what it is. I mean, because it's got just more to it than a lot of films in this genre.
Boo! I hate when people say things like that because I just want to look them dead in the eye and just tell them, you need to watch more horror movies. But I can never be mad when we bring a new Scream King into the fold. We also got to see him in Scream 6 earlier this year. For better or for worse. Obviously, the Best Casting Award goes to Lin Shaye, who they brought more to the forefront of this movie. Elise is very dear to Lin Shaye's heart, as she has mentioned before, and so she was really excited to come back. And she is actually the entire reason why this movie was a prequel and not a sequel.
And so that meant that in the second film we had to deal with her as a ghost, and Lynn and I had a lot of conversations on the set of the second film about just how hard it is to play a ghost. Where do you even start? Like, do you keep your arms straight?
That's what James said. Don't use your arms, don't gesture. That was really one physical thing that we sort of came up with. And
I even remember you asking at one stage, like, so do I blink? Do ghosts blink?
Yeah, I did.
I mean, there is a weird bunch of questions that go along with...
Do you register emotion? I mean, a whole bunch of probably corny ways we could have brought that into
and
the world.
I just really didn't want to deal with that. When I was writing the script, I didn't want to have those conversations again. I wanted to go back in time and find out who Elise was before we met her in the first film.
Honestly, I had never considered how she acted differently while she was a ghost, but I love that attention to detail. Elise seemed otherworldly to me already, so I guess that's why I never picked up on it. So she wins Best Acting in this movie for me, but the Best Cameo award has to go to James Wan, who plays like this snobby headmaster of Quinn's dream school. Finally, the roles were reversed between James Wan and Lee Wan-el during the press junket, which led to some really funny moments.
Well, it was good directing James as an actor, so I can get back at him for all his years of abuse and poor treatment.
You kidding me? I was like, this is the easiest thing as an actor. I just sit there and just say my lines and then go back to my trailer, go to the craft service table. It's
It is
easy
pretty
stuff.
easy. I'm not gonna lie. I was ruthless with him. I think his performance was poor, but I saved it in editing.
Honestly, he's not wrong. A lot about acting is not that hard, especially when you have a great director, and Lee Wan-el apparently brought over all the same good vibes from the previous Insidious sets. According to Lin Shaye, he is extremely collaborative with her and her character, and sometimes they would even come up with dialogue between takes just to try new things. He seems so self-assured, like all of this comes so easy to him, and I'm sure with writing it does, but like I said, some of the technical stuff was pretty difficult. He talks a lot about his various fumbles during the press junket, and actually I think has some really valuable insight.
I remember one really embarrassing moment where I picked up the viewfinder. You know, it's, for those who don't know, it's like it lets you see what the camera would see without actually having to pick up the whole camera. And so I'm kind of looking through it, and everyone's standing around, the whole crew, and I said, so are the black lines, is that the edge of frame? And I just saw all these blank looks and realized I just asked the dumbest question. It's like learning to swim by diving off Niagara Falls. Like, you just kind of get on the set and you have to play catch up. There were many moments like that where I embarrassed myself, basically.
It's a nice little success story for him and this movie because, like its predecessors, it was a hit. They did hilarious ploys for marketing yet again, which apparently worked. For example, they had the Real Housewives go into the further. It was basically just another Insidious experience, kind of like the one that they had at Comic-Con. I can't believe that more horror movies aren't still doing that. I mean, we do have Halloween Horror Nights, but that's always long after the movie comes out. But I think they should bring this back because this movie cost $11 million to make and made $113 million at the box office. Made over $100 million in profit. It also somehow fared much better critically than the previous movie. It has a 57% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's still not good at all, but when you put it into perspective of the scores of the first two movies, it doesn't really make sense. Insidious Chapter 3 isn't as terrifying as the original, although it boasts surprising thematic depth and is enlivened by another fine performance by Lin Shaye. Honestly, that is fair enough, but I had always gathered that this was most people's least favorite movie of the franchise. Let's make some Letterboxd comparisons. So, with almost 500,000 reviews, the first Insidious sits at a 3.2, Insidious Chapter 2 sits at a 2.9 with only 223,000 reviews, and just as I suspected, with only 131,000 ratings, Insidious Chapter 3 sits at a 2.5, so it's the lowest rated of the first three by fans. However, what continues to blow my mind is how apparently positive the critical response is. It has the highest rating of the entire franchise on Roger Ebert's website. Lin Shaye gets a chance to show an unusual amount of range for a horror movie heroine, from sadness and vulnerability to strength and resiliency. She's just as effective with a sympathetic look as she is with a well-timed quip. It's a joy to see such a seasoned performer seize her place in the spotlight at last. Class, can you say it with me? Watch more horror movies. I do not like the rhetoric of, oh, an unusual amount of range exhibited from a horror movie heroine. Bitch. Critics say dumb things like that to sound smart, when in reality, if they were more familiar with the genre, they would know about The Final Girl. They would know that it is the only genre where women get an equal amount of screen time to men. Therefore, it is probably the richest genre if you are looking for well-rounded, badass female characters. Don't piss me off. Now, I am willing to conclude my beef with this particular critic because she left off saying some very nice things about Elise. Watching Elise summon her inner strength to fight enemies on all sides in various dimensions, some of which exist in long, carpeted, apparent hallways decorated in shining chic, is the film's real thrill, and if and when he makes Insidious Chapter 4, when I will be wise to let her show what she can do once more. Petite and feisty, she's the most capable person in the room, alive or dead, and easily the most fascinating. On that much, we can agree. Now, I'm gonna lump Chris Stuckman in with the critics here because I know that this was only, oh my god, this was 8 years ago. Oh god, I thought we were getting more modern with these reviews, but like we're not quite yet. Anyway, I I felt that I had to kind of keep coming back to the two reviewers that I cited initially just because I'm kind of a completionist. I feel like it's interesting to see a single person's arc with the franchise. I'm lumping Chris in with the critics because he apparently liked this film more than Insidious Chapter 2. He's very fond of Lee Whannell as a director and was fond of a lot of the jump scares. And of course, he gave praise to the girl.
Lynn Shay, who plays Elise, the psychic. My God, that's one of the best performances from an actress I've seen so far this year. She was really good.
I can tell you really mean that, Chris. I appreciate it. Overall, it got the same score from him as the last film. He gave it a B, which surprised me. I think because regardless of not having that much else going on, he really appreciated the direction and all the suspense. Jeremy Jahns, I don't know if we would be friends because I just do not like the way that he used to talk about women.
So now the only one who can help her is the super awesome old chick from the other Insidious movies.
Super awesome old chick? Ah, bitch. But he too said that this was a good movie and a worthy conclusion to the trilogy, which I don't believe it's a trilogy. I know it's chapter 3, but it's a prequel, so like what actually constitutes a trilogy? Anyways, he also said that this was a good time, no alcohol required, so he was still using that metric. Now, can we keep up the winning streak for the franchise with the 4th installment? Let's find out. Insidious The Last Key truly puts Elise as the forefront leading character and explores her abusive backstory. She learns that a key-handed demon influenced her father and others who lived in the house to commit unspeakable acts on his behalf. While back in her childhood home, she sends the demon back to the depths where it belongs with the help of her crew and makes amends with her family. Now, because this is the 4th movie of a major franchise, there is just not that much in the press junkets or behind the scenes to get into. With previous box office success and a star like Lynn Shay, this movie was gonna sell itself. So this will be the shortest chapter of the video, but a fun few tidbits nonetheless. This movie was not directed by James Wan or Lee Whannell. It was directed by Adam Robitel, probably because Lee Whannell was off directing another movie called Upgrade. You might recognize some of Robitel's movies, The Taking of Deborah Logan or Escape Room, which are both good fun movies. And I had no idea he directed Insidious The Last Key until now.
It's kind of like going in under the shadow of Michael Jordan and trying to do a layup.
Yes, he had big shoes to fill here, and other challenges presented themselves as well, especially with the story. But again, Lee Whannell was writing the script. This time he rented a house in Spain for him and his family to write in. He said that it was just as miserable as writing at home in LA, if not more so, because his family would take off and leave him there while they went to the beach. I don't know, man. I think I would still rather write my movies in Spain. But yet again, this is another prequel, so it came with its own challenges.
My big concern coming into chapter 4 is, you know, when you make a horror film, you're only as scared as your lead character. So like, for example, in chapter 1, Rose Byrne and Patrick Wilson, they've never experienced anything like this, or at least Patrick doesn't remember he did, but, you know, so they were super terrified. And with Lynn and with Elise, I see her kind of like a superhero, so she's not really scared of ghosts. I mean, she goes in with the earpiece and she's kind of walking around, and so for me, when I came in, I was like, you know, we need an entity, we need a demon that not only scares her, but that literally took away the one thing that she held most dear to her, which was her mother.
I think this must be another reason why they decided to make a prequel instead of another sequel. It's only as interesting as your main character's biggest struggle, and Lynn Shay has proven herself to be the most interesting person of this franchise. And focusing on her past and confronting her own demons was so interesting because we'd only ever really known her as like this feisty little lady before. We didn't know her story, which, by the way, there's a deleted scene of this movie that goes even deeper into her past. She tells this story about how she really liked this boy and her father found out that she had been spending time with him. So he forced her to wear the same clothes every single day and did not allow her to wash them. Eventually she started to smell so bad that all the other kids made fun of her and they called her Smellies. And eventually the boy she liked never talked to her again. Maybe they cut that because they knew that we would be up in arms, especially because they know how closely we all tie her with her character.
I filled her in, but...
Well, at this stage, I don't know where you start and the character stops. Like, to me, Elise and Lynn are one and the same person, so it's great to have her step into the role because she knows this role better than any of us.
I'm not as nice as Elise.
Sure you are. Sure you are.
One of her biggest challenges was also making sure that her arc concluded where her character began in Insidious Part 1. It was a tricky line to walk because it was like this whole new side of Elise that we had not known about before. So despite overcoming this huge thing in this movie, she still had to end as the Elise that we already knew. And that's kind of the extent of the behind the scenes, which is disappointing to me because it also stars the icon Javier Botet, an icon who does not get paid what he is due for the amount of insane creature work he's done. But they never interview the creature actors for like anything. I mean, they do for Evil Dead, but that's just because pretty much everyone becomes a creature actor at some point during that franchise.
Well, for me, I remember writing the character very simply. A lot simpler in its presentation. You know, it was essentially just a guy in a suit with these key hands.
Okay, that's cool. Now I would like to hear from the makeup department and from Javier Botet himself on how they developed the character from there. He did really incredible work on this movie. I don't care if you have to put English subtitles on his interviews. Find an interviewer who speaks Spanish for once, you goons. I myself am on Duolingo. I've been trying to learn Spanish for years. Just give me like another 5 years and then put me in front of that man.
Okay, but also he speaks English perfectly well. So put me in front of him right goddamn now.
Anyways, maybe they didn't do that because they knew the movie would sell itself regardless, and it did. Welcome to the most successful movie of the Insidious franchise, at least monetarily. This movie cost $10 million, so $1 million less than Chapter 3, and it went on to make about $168 million in the box office. Now, despite the monetary success, critically it has done the worst. It receives a 33% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 2.4 on Letterboxd, which was kind of surprising to me. That's the worst rating of the entire franchise, including the Red Door so far on either platform. Now, on Roger Ebert's website, reviewed yet again by Simon Abrams, he gave it 2.5 stars. You may think you should see The Last Key with a friend because being sociable is a good excuse for poor life choices. But the best rationalization for seeing The Last Key with another person is being able to look at another soul and realizing you're not losing it when you think, wait, this one is almost good. Am I this much of an asshole too? Like, seriously. You don't have to be all pompous about it, like, poor life choices, seeing the fourth movie of a horror franchise. I hate mainstream critic speak. That's why we're done with it for this video, and why for the last time we are diving back to the archives of the YouTube. Let's see for the last time what Chris Stuckman and Jeremy Johns had to say. Now, Jeremy actually predicted the future this time around.
This is Hollywood sequel speak 101 right here. The Last Key is only the insinuation that this is going to be the last movie. It's the last movie unless this movie makes money, in which case The Last Key is not going to be the last movie. If this movie makes money, there will be a fifth Insidious movie called The Final Key or The Final Door or something. And so on and so forth until they reboot it. That's your language lesson for the day.
He was pretty close to the title there, no? And now he has updated the way that he references Lynn Shay, much to my approval. He goes, they bring back Lynn Shay as Elise Rainier, the paranormal investigator of the previous Insidious movies. That's how you do it, He says that he feels like about the first half of the movie was kind of a waste of time, and he never really felt scared during this movie, besides maybe during some jump scares. That was pretty much his conclusion, and now he has a new rating system.
So I will say I'm probably not going to remember Insidious The Last Key in T-1 day. Yep, already forgot.
So that is the first of the franchise not to get a pass by Jeremy Johns. Let's now see what Chris Stuckman had to say. It is quite sad. It seems like he has maybe abandoned his weird little fun intros, but his thesis was basically just that yes, each Insidious movie does kind of progressively get worse from the original, but at least the franchise does not have its own Halloween resurrection. He didn't love the movie, but he did give Lynn Shay a ton of praise and said that she was the best thing about the movie, so he gave the movie a B-, which was actually a kinder score than I was expecting from him. Overall, the Insidious franchise continues to win, even if the critics make fun of it. If they've never liked it, the fans keep it afloat. You will see that trend continues with Insidious The Red Door, but let me not speak on that now because my review will come out in a few days. That movie will probably still be in theaters for the next few weeks, so get out there and see it soon. That way you will be ready for my next juicy spoiler-filled review. Now, you might have noticed these lovely names on screen. These are the people that make these videos happen. My patrons support me monetarily, which allows me the time to make these giant, well-researched, and very heavily edited videos. Without them, it is literally not possible, so as a thank you, I do post 4 to 6 bonus videos over on Patreon every single month. Typically, I post reviews of popular non-horror movies like Guardians of the Galaxy or the new Indiana Jones, but I also do solo reviews of new horror movies that I don't really feel like giving in-depth, deep dive reviews on my main channel. Sometimes I go back and I review old horror movies movies, like I did a whole review on Mulholland Drive, and sometimes my watch-alongs do get copyright issues, so I have to take them down from my main channel, but they live on forever on Patreon. If that's not for you though, you could also consider supporting my next short horror film. It's going to be called Liked. We are almost 3/5 of the way through our first fundraising goal. We will probably have a stretch goal put on top of that because I really want to get an animatronic for the practical effects of my short. You could also check out my short horror debut. That'll be linked down below right under the GoFundMe. I'm trying to become the next Lee Wanell, you know? Or just check out my social media. That's fun too. You can follow me there. On Instagram, I keep you up to date on whatever I'm working on. And on Twitter, I just talk a lot of shit. More than anything, I just hope that you enjoyed this video and that I catch you in the next one. So until then, bye!